I understand that the prefrontal lobes of the human brain are not fully formed into you're 26 years old. If you're a female, 25 years old. You get the extra year because you're smarter than us males. And I get that kids, in my case, a 5-year-old and a 9-year-old, I get that they don't necessarily know how to manage their emotions. And let's just assume a 45-year-old male who's married and lives in Silicon Valley does know how to manage his emotions, which I can tell you I often fail, especially around my kids. So I get these things. I get the things about how kids are learning how to manage their emotions and their brain gets slammed with dopamine and it gets slammed with these chemicals. And so they feel their highs very high and they feel their lows very low. But at the end of a long day, after you've taken your 2 kids to the pool, to the water slide, took them out to In-N-Out, let them watch some extra video, and then when you bring them home and you sit them down for dinner, and mind you, you're the only one doing this day because your wife is out, which is totally fine. And when you sit them down for dinner, the 9-year-old pushes his food away and says, "It's cold." You would think after an amazing day, there would be something in that 9-year-old's brain that'd be like, "Hey, my dad's given me a great day. I think the food is slightly colder than I'm used to. So I'm going to say, hey, Dad, would you mind heating this up?" But that is not what happens to a 9-year-old brain, or at least most 9-year-olds' brain. And I know this. I have read the books on brain development and kid development. I know this stuff. But in that moment, at the end of the day, at 5 o'clock, right, I am drained. I don't have the capacity to go, oh, there's my 9-year-old who I love and sometimes I feel I'm in service to, and he's having a difficult time. He's having to process everything. So it doesn't matter when you know all these things, because as soon as your brain gets stressed, your prefrontal lobes go offline. And I know this, but it doesn't happen when mine go offline and my limbic system takes over. And yet we think we should act differently, and we know we should act differently when we look in hindsight. So I put a pretty neat talk together for you, and it's a slightly different. No price charts today. None needed, by the way, because nothing has really changed in the market. And sometimes I think, a weekly phone call, we don't really need a weekly podcast sometimes. Sometimes you may not need anything for weeks or months. But in a world where you're getting slammed with information by the second, I look even at a weekly basis and go, not much has changed. Gold is still going up. S&P is still going up. Bond prices are still going up. Nothing has really changed. And I am not being compensated to come out with a daily or an hourly or a minutely comment on the market. I'm paid to have people hire me so their investments grow and they are protected. Hey everybody, this is RC Peck, and this is my weekend podcast. It's actually episode number 347, September 3rd. And we're going to talk about our brains. And I believe this is an incredibly important podcast. I hope you see that too. Now, I know if I put in the subject line what this podcast is actually about, no one will read it. And I understand that because I understand that we are all Pavlovian animals. We salivate at what we think is important. And so there's this super important topic that I want to bring up, and I want you to go with me on this very short journey because it's super important. I'm going to talk about cognitive biases. I'm going to talk about how the brain works against you and will continue to work against me. And there's 168 and counting known ways that the brain will absolutely work against you. So here we go. And I'm going to list some of them, or most of them for you. Go with me on this. There's one called ambiguity effect, anchoring, anthropomorphism, attention bias, automation bias, availability heuristic, availability cascade, backfire effect, bandwagon effect, base rate fallacy, belief bias, bias blind spot, cheerleader effect, choice supportive bias. Let's just talk about one of these, anchoring. Just one. I'm not going to talk about all of them. Just one. This is a decision, okay? It's a tendency to rely too heavily on that one piece of information when making a decision. It's usually the first piece of information you acquire on that subject. We have this. This doesn't help us. Oh, and we're not done. You have clustering bias. You have confirmation bias. You have congruence bias. You have conjunction fallacy. You have conservatism. You have continued influence effect. You have contrast effect. You have curse of knowledge. You have declinism, decoy effect, domination effect, disposition effect, distinction bias, Dunning-Kruger effect. Let's just point out one of these, declinism. This is the belief and the predisposition to view the... Hold on. This is the belief that a society or institution is tending towards decline, right? Particularly, it's the predisposition to view the past as favorably and the future as negative. There was a huge campaign that came out a few years ago saying the end of the dollar. Guys, the dollar's been declining in purchasing power since 1776, but we have this thing called declinism, and so we all are Pavlovian, and we go and just react and go, oh, we need that. Okay, duration neglect, empathy gap, endowment effect, essentialism, exaggerated expectation, expectation bias, focusing effect, Forer effect, Barnum effect, framing effect, frequency illusion, functional fixedness, gambler's fallacy, hard easy effect. Guys, these are very real things. Let's just look at one of them, Barnum effect. It's the effect that individuals will give a higher accuracy rate in descriptions about their personal situation because it was supposedly tailored for them, right? So what this means is if you go to a fortune teller or an astrologist, or you have a personality test, you'll believe those more because it's about you. So if anyone talks to you about a stock, or if you believe something about a stock and you think it has to do with you, like, oh yeah, I buy my food at PetSmart. That's about me. I see the good prices there. I should probably go buy PetSmart. That's a bias. It does not actually help the growth of your money. We have hindsight bias. We have hot hand fallacy. We have hyperbolic discounting. We have identifiable victim effect, IKEA effect, illusion of control, illusion of validity, illusion of correlation, impact bias, information bias, insensitivity to sample size, irrational escalation, less is better effect, loss aversion. Let's just pick one of these. The IKEA effect sounds kind of funny, but this is true. This is the tendency to place a disproportionately higher value on an object that you have assembled yourself regardless on quality. What this means is if you spend a disproportionately amount of time on researching a stock, you will increase its value. You will think it has more value. You will think you know something about it. And that will be a bias. And this is one of the things that hurts people. We have the mere exposure effect, the money illusion, the moral credential effect, the negativity bias, neglect of probability, normalcy bias, not invented here. Observation expectancy effect, omission bias, ostrich effect, outcome bias, overconfidence effect. Pareidolia? It sounds like a body part. Pessimism bias. Yeah? Let's just look at outcome bias. Just one of them. Just look at outcome bias. This is the bias that you ignore the obvious. Like, Enron started at $90. It ended at $0. And somewhere in there, people had to be ignoring that this thing was falling. We ignore stuff that is right in front of us. We ignore the obvious in front of us. It's called outcome bias. Pelzer effect, planning fallacy, post-purchase rationalization, pro-innovation bias, projection bias, pseudo-certainty effect, reactance, reactive devaluation, recency illusion, restraint bias, rhyme as reason effect, risk compensation, selective perception, Semmelweis reflex. Okay, we're going to just pick one on this. The pseudo-certainty effect is the tendency to make conservative choices if the expected outcome is positive, but make aggressive choices to avoid negative outcomes. This is so interesting. If we know the outcome is going to be kind of on the conservative side and positive, if we know the outcome is going to be positive and we are conservative about it, but we go to these aggressive, excessive actions and choices if we think we can avoid a negative outcome. This is one of the reasons why people panic at bottoms and scoop things up at the top. There's these pseudo-certainty effects that happen to our brain that it's actually happening, but it's not actual. I guess it is reality because it's happening in your limbic system, but this is something that hurts the growth of your portfolio. Social comparison bias, social desirability bias, status quo bias, stereotyping, subadditivity effect, subjective validation, subjective bias, time-saving bias, third-person effect, Parkinson's law of triviality, unit bias, Weber, Fetcher law, well-traveled road effect, zero risk bias. Just let's look at one of these. This stuff is important to how you grow your money. No price charts right here, guys. This is the stuff. Everything sits on top of your behavior. Everything. Not just money, your relationships, your health, everything. Now, we're talking about money, and I'm pointing out 168, and I'm not clearly giving the definition of all 168 of these cognitive biases. I'm just giving you 13 of them, or highlighting 13 of them. Parkinson's law of triviality, the tendency to give disproportionate weight to trivial issues because it's easier to grasp. Okay, so if it's a trivial thing, but it's easier to grasp, I'm going to anchor to that. I'm going to give that a lot of weight. Okay. So we do this with our stock investments. We look for things that are easy to remember. Oh, yeah. No, Microsoft, it's good. Oh, no, Google, bad, good. It's this trivial thing, but it's the way our brain works. Not our prefrontal lobes, but our limbic system. Oh, we're almost there, guys. Zero-sum bias, actor-observer bias, defensive attribution, hypothesis, egocentric bias, extrinsic incentive bias, false consensus effect, Forer effect, fundamental attribution error, group attribution error, groupthink effect, halo effect, illusion of asymmetric insight, illusion of external agency, illusion of transparency. Let's just go with that one right there, the last one. What is that? Look, here it is. People overestimate their ability to know others. Hey, I know that guy that runs that company. Now, I don't really know him, but I know of him and I've heard him speak and I like him. Therefore, I like the company. Therefore, I'm going to buy the stock. Therefore, if the stock starts going against me, I'm going to ignore that because I have this illusion of transparency going on in my brain because I know John Chambers and he's going to run Cisco well. Guys, it's an illusion. It's not actually there. It's not actually going to help you grow your money. Choice supportive bias, change bias, childhood amnesia, conservatism bias, consistency bias, context effect, cross-race effect, cryptomnesia, egocentric bias, fading effect bias, false memory, generation effect, Google effect, humor effect. Guys, these are real things that are literally driving the growth of your money, but you don't even realize it. Let's just look at fading effect. It's the bias in which the emotion associated with unpleasant memories fades more quickly than the emotions associated with positive memories. So when you buy a ticker symbol and there's a positive memory about that, the fading effect is going to have you remember that really good experience you had when you bought that one ticker symbol and made 50%. But it's going to eliminate or fade the effect when you bought those other 17 ticker symbols where you lost 50%. Those memories will be, though, they're just farther away. This is absolutely hurting the growth of your money. Illusory bias, in-group bias, just world hypothesis, moral luck, naive realism, naive cynicism, out-group homogeneity bias, self-serving bias, shared information bias, system justification trait, ascription bias, ultimate attribution error, worse than average effect, bizarreness effect. Just look at one of these, self-serving bias. This is the tendency to claim more responsibility for success than failure. Hey, that stock went up. That was all because of me. Hey, that stock went down. Oh, it wasn't really my fault. It's just that the market turned against me, or they came out with bad earnings, or blah, blah, blah. That's self-serving bias. These are not going away, by the way. These are not. These cognitive dissonance, these cognitive effects, they're not going away. Yeah, illusion of truth is not going away. Illusory correlation, lag effect, level of processing effect, list length effect, misinformation effect, mood congruent memory effect, next in line effect, part list queuing effect, peak end rule, persistent effect, picture superiority effect, positivity effect. These are not going away. Let's just look at one of these, illusions of truth. People are more likely to believe a familiar statement than an unfamiliar one. Like, hey, if it's familiar, you remember someone saying that diversification is something that is good for your money, you're going to remember that and you'll believe it to be true because it's familiar to you. And because something's familiar, it must be true, right? Well, you know that's not right. Recency effect, serial position effect, processing difficulty effect, reminiscent bump effect, rosy retrospection effect, self-reliance effect, source confusion, spacing effect, spotlight effect, stereotypical bias, suffix effect, suggestibility effect, telescoping effect, testing effect. Now, the spacing effect is kind of similar to what we just talked about, but look, information is better recalled if exposed to repeatedly over a long time period. This can help you if what you're being exposed to is true, but if what you're being exposed to is a myth or a lie or just not true, spacing effect is going to hurt you. And again, diversification. I have to diversify. Why? Well, it's a familiar idea, and I've been exposed to it repeatedly over the last 20 years. Therefore, it must be true. Whew, guys, there was 168. There is not just 168. I will spare you. There's hundreds of these. And there are dozens and dozens and dozens of more being termed and realized as behavioral scientists find out more about how fragile our brain is and how much bias we have. This shows up in money. This is what's hurting you. This is what's hurting you. Because everything sits on top of your behavior. Again, whether it's your wealth or your health or your relationships, we're talking about the stock market here, we're talking about investing. This is what's most important, is how you behave. Okay, so what's the takeaway? First of all, get help and get the right tools. You cannot do this on your own. One of the first things I would suggest is you absolutely need a checklist with what I call anti-fatigue steps. The brain goes into something called decision fatigue when it has to make too many decisions, and eventually it just shuts down and makes no decisions, or it makes a really rash decision. Both decisions are really bad. You are going to want a checklist that you can look at and say, okay, what's the next step? What just happened? What's the next step? The next thing, you want a strategy that accepts your humanness. You're human, you're flawed, I get it, so am I. Don't go looking for a strategy that only works in the weekends, on the Saturday and the Sunday when you're at the workshop, but then as soon as you get home, you keep getting hit with Monday and it doesn't work anymore. Get one that accepts, hey, you have these biases, you have this brain that shuts down when it gets stressed, and when that part of the brain shuts down, which is your prefrontal lobes, the really old part of your brain turns on? Your limbic system, right? Your brainstem, your reticular activation system. These are the things that have kept your ancestors alive to allow you to be on this planet. And lastly, if you can't do it yourself, if you have not been implementing the system you want to over the last 90 days, then just assume it's not going to happen. Just get someone to do it. It's fine. It's not a big deal. What is a big deal is if you don't recognize that you can't do it, and then you think you should do it. Well, there's no should. Either be able to implement it yourself or get someone else to do it. Super straightforward. Now, here is one of the things. Even if you know this stuff, even if you studied it, even if you have your PhD in it, even if you're tall, beautiful, rich, and your spouse is gorgeous, and your kids are quote unquote perfect, and you know all this stuff, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you learned all 168 that I just told you, and you got your PhD and MD and whatever D in it. It actually doesn't matter. How frustrating is that, even when you know these things? But get a checklist that understands that. Get a strategy that understands that. If you can't implement it, get someone that can do it. This can be straightforward. Thanks, guys, for being on this journey with me today. This is much more important than what was going on this week, which basically was nothing. And this is just another step in helping you protect your portfolio and protect your future. Until next time, this is RC Peck. Hey guys, last week I talked about my Peak Gold training, and first of all, I love the training, but what I think was most effective when people watched it was the offer I had at the end, and including in that offer was to never have no upsells, no research upsells ever. Most people who come into my world have been hit hard by all the newsletters, pick of the month newsletters, and they're always getting upsold to other newsletters. And I just said, you know what? If someone buys my research, I'm going to never upsell them on more research. And the only way people would do more with me is if they want more of my time. That would be for personal coaching or for money management. The other thing is I said, look, if you get this, if you buy that Peak Gold strategy, I'm going to give you my other strategies. You can have them. This will not always be this way. I will take this down. Absolutely. I'll probably take it down after Labor Day. But this is the time to get it. And you actually get to interact with me. So if you haven't had a chance, I did put the replay up for 24 more hours. There was a lot of feedback on just the offer at the end. And why we are in a peak gold cycle, when it's going to end, when did it start, how this strategy, LTech gold or LTech metal, it's the same thing, how it knew to stay out 13, 14, and 15. So you have that. I'll keep that up for actually probably for the weekend, and then I'll take it down. Thank you guys for being in my world. Have a great Labor Day weekend here in the U.S. It's Labor Day weekend. You guys take care.